Welcome to the Real News Network. My name is Taya Graham, and I'm joined by my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. Today, we're going to be debuting a new show focused around a single topic, the country's growing income inequality. You might have noticed watching the Democratic debates how rarely this topic comes up. In fact, if Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren weren't in the race, it would have probably never surfaced. Part of that is simply because mainstream media is as much co-opted by inequality as they are defined by it. Seriously, how do you expect anchors making millions of dollars a year to question a system that enriches them? But it goes deeper than simply a media narrative. It is clear that the growing concentration of wealth in this country is one of the greatest existential threats to humanity and informs much of the destructive policy, as well as making inflammatory rhetoric that is tearing our country apart. I mean, after all, the current occupant of the White House is a billionaire, and his policy embodies all the worst aspects of the aforementioned crisis and more. So to tackle this issue in a way that is both new and productive, we're going to take a twofold approach here. That's because part of our mission at The Real News is to use our platform that is donor-funded without corporate advertising to tell uncomfortable truths and provide context to topics that would otherwise be lacking. So, Stephen, do you want to give us an overview of how we're going to be approaching this?
Well, like we always want to do here at The Real News is use the fact that we're in one of the cities that is probably one of the best examples of how income inequality is fostered by rich billionaires and by what has often been called the pathology of capitalism. You know, we see here, we are ground zero, especially now that Donald Trump has decided to cite this as an example of dysfunction and trying to make it seem like it's purely political, but it's also a function of inequality. We have some of the worst income inequality. And then, you know, secondly, we're going to tie these to the national issues and the national debate that often doesn't have context. Because a lot of times you will hear these arguments from people like Trump and not realize that many of these policies come and originate exactly from this problem, the problem that there is heightened income inequality, which changes all the dynamics, both political, social, and even the rhetorical debate. So that's what we're going to try to do.
So our first topic is aimed at pointing out a moment of the debate that the mainstream media glossed over and to reveal the imperative behind that oversight. To us, it was one of the most critical moments of the entire slog, but receives little attention. Let's watch.
Issues together, we can get less
Senator Sanders, I'm going to go to Senator Sanders, then Senator Warren, because we both were mentioned.
Senator Sanders. The Medicare bill, let me clear up one thing. As people talk about having insurance, there are millions of people who have insurance, they can't go to the doctor, and when they come out of the hospital, they go bankrupt, all right? What I am talking about, and others up here are talking about, is no deductibles and no co-payments. And Jake, your question is a Republican talking point. At the end of the day, and by the way, the healthcare industry will be advertising tonight on this program.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Warren, it's your turn.
Oh, can I complete that, please?
Your time is up, 30 seconds.
They will be advertising tonight with that talking point.
So, Stephen, Bernie is called out for asking a question that essentially, you know, Jake Tapper oversimplifies. I mean, essentially, isn't he using Republican talking points when he's pushing back on Bernie's healthcare ideas?
It's deeper than that. What he's using is the talking points of the healthcare companies that support CNN.
Right.
Because the question is incredibly simplistic. Everybody knows that if you have Medicare for all, you're not going to be paying health insurance premiums at all, which is one of the biggest rising parts of a worker's paycheck. But instead of saying that or talking about the balance or the trade-off, he's saying, are you going to raise taxes? Where do we remember that from? Remember George Bush, 25, 30 years ago? Read my lips, no new taxes. You know, taxes is the anthem of the billionaire class. And they use it to scare middle-class people from benefits that would help them. So that question was inane, it was insulting, oversimplified, and totally did not reflect the complexity or even the benefits. You know, you could have asked, you know, what are the trade-offs of Medicare for all?
Certainly.
Something like that. But instead, and why? And Bernie points out and says quite adroitly, well, you know, there's going to be a pharmaceutical advertising, right?
Right. It doesn't, Tesla advertise at around $1 million a year?
Top 3 out of 10 advertisers in the most recent quarter for CNN are healthcare providers. Anybody who watches that channel, it's healthcare advertising driven.
Prescription advertising driven, Humira, Tesla,
and
things
instead
like
of Jake Tapper addressing that and being transparent and saying,
cut him off.
you know, you have a point, and I understand what you're saying. He did the BS stuff that they do in the mainstream media, which is just gloss over it because he has the power to do that. But it's apparent right? Why would, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And that question to me was written by a publicist from the healthcare company, or as Salon said, an intern at the Heritage Foundation, which of course is a conservative foundation.
Now, isn't it true that raising taxes is kind of a red herring because
Absolutely.
it won't, the amount of money that people save on their healthcare premiums actually offset any sort of tax increase?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, we pay incredible amounts of money to fund this incredibly inefficient healthcare, healthcare company insurance, which is BS anyway, because insurance is supposed to plan for, exceptional events, not for something that's going to happen, which we all need healthcare.
Absolutely,
and
we all do.
Any elimination of that would make the system more efficient. And in the end, I think most middle-class people and people who aren't middle class would benefit tremendously from this, but they want to fearmonger, and they use that taxes. And why would Jake Tapper play into that? That's not a fair question.
Next, we're going to discuss a more granular example of how income inequality operates in cities like Baltimore. In fact, this example shows why billionaires like Trump are in fact responsible for the conditions they condemn. As everyone knows, Trump called our home, Baltimore City, a disgusting, rat and rodent-infested place that no human would want to live in. But what Trump failed to mention is how the ultra-wealthy have exploited the poverty of cities like Baltimore for their own gain, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who I will get to later. One great tool for heightening income inequality in cities like Baltimore are massive tax breaks doled out by taxpayers to white suburban developers. We've been doing a long-term investigation into these tax breaks given to developers by the city, and one of the big projects we've looked at is Harbor Point. So, Stephen, Harbor Point was a massive development built on Baltimore City's already wealthy waterfront. And didn't they actually use one of the poorest neighborhoods in Baltimore City to help earn themselves that tax break?
This is an amazing story. A white developer from the suburbs, owns a piece of land right on the Inner Harbor, beautiful piece of land, prime property in Baltimore, gets a $100 million tax break, called a TIF, tax increment financing, which means he doesn't have to pay his property taxes, but can use it to invest in the building. So he's got that, right? But he wants more. He wants what's called an enterprise zone tax credit, which is something that was created decades ago to fund building of jobs and other types of manufacturing infrastructure in poor communities. So, but the problem is that piece of property is actually quite in a wealthy area. So he takes a line and he connects it to Perkins Homes, which is about half a mile down the street, which is a low-income housing project filled with people who make way below, the federal poverty level. Right. He uses that to get the enterprise zone tax credit and net himself another $80 million, okay? So you tell me who's causing these problems. Meanwhile, Perkins Homes is neglected, abandoned, for years has been allowed to run down. We have been there, it's rat infested because no one's taking care of it.
Right, absolutely. It's breaking down because maintenance either doesn't have the money or, as some residents fear, even the inclination to address the problems.
As many guests we've had on before, including Jeff Singer, who is a housing advocate, they have purposely de-invested in public housing, unlike other countries, and made it crappy. So now they can sell it to wealthy developers, which is just what's happening. And so it's a perfect example of Trump problematizing Baltimore, but actually it's his people, his billionaires and rich people who are benefiting off this. So it's really just rhetorical BS.
And now we're also joined by one of our interns, Kate Turner, who's been helping us with our investigation. Kate has been looking at a key promise the developers of Harbor Point made in exchange for the tax incentives. And this promise was to create jobs for city residents. So we decided to investigate just how many jobs a $100 million in tax breaks actually buys. But we ran into some obstacles. Isn't that right, Stephen?
Yeah, well, I mean, they didn't post the job reports as they're supposed to, so when I was trying to get Kate the information, it just wasn't there. We had to file MPI requests and battle with the city for months and months just to get the data that they promised to give the city, to give to residents and post on a daily basis to show that we're getting something for this tax break.
So, Kate, you did an analysis of the jobs reports. Can you talk a little bit about your findings?
So I looked at the manpower reports for Harbor Point. And what I found was that 53 employers worked on the Harbor Point development. Right. On average, each employer worked on the development for 9 months. Right. Okay. But on average, during those 9 months, they only had 3.8 Baltimore City residents on payroll for each month.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that the average job lasted only 9 months and a very small percentage actually went to Baltimore City residents. Is that correct?
Yes. Many of these companies never had a single Baltimore City resident on their payroll.
That's absolutely amazing.
So,
Stephen,
yeah.
how is this even possible that a developer is able to get away with this when he made promises not only to city officials, but essentially to the taxpayers of our
Well,
city?
here's the thing. One thing that's really illustrative about this and what you found is that no other project that's been given this kind of tax break does these kind of job reports. And the fact that it was so difficult says something, which is these big tax breaks do one thing. They make the rich richer. They don't give jobs to city employees. And what the data, your analysis of data shows, is that barely any people from the city of Baltimore who are funding this were hired, number one. And number two, the duration, that's not the kind of job, like 7 or 8 months doesn't do anybody much good, to stabilize.
Right, that's
or 8
sort of
months.
temporary work.
So, I mean, I think what Kate's analysis has shown, number one, it's temporary. Number two, it's not benefiting the people who are paying for it.
Kate,
So-
what's your take on your findings here? What do you think of the information that you found in this jobs report?
So I think it just really shows how sort of shallow and empty this promise that development creates jobs is. It does create jobs, but a lot of these contractors don't even think about employing people from the city. They're working with people that are from the suburbs or from elsewhere, and it has nothing to do with giving Baltimore residents a chance.
So the bottom line here is this. Billionaires like Trump profit off of poverty and dysfunction and then use it as a foil for their racist and nativist chants. It's a convenient cycle that both enriches the few and pathologizes the rest of us, and probably the best example of the damaging ethos of capitalism, and begs the question, can we break this destructive cycle? I want to thank Real News intern Kate Turner and investigative reporter Stephen Janis for discussing this with me. My name is Taya Graham, and this is the Inequality Watch. Thank you so much for joining me.